Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of pickups, way more than you're seeing on this table, that all came from Japan due to a recent trip I took out there. Before we get into that though, please, very quickly, if you guys can do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that already, and go into the description. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. I appreciate the support, as well as my new travel channel, which actually has a whole bunch of videos of the entire trip to Japan, as well as a whole bunch of other places you can check out if you're ever curious about going to places and seeing adventures and restaurant recommendations and all that sort of stuff. It's all over there. I appreciate the support. Now, this is going to be a long video. I don't know yet because I'm filming it, but I'm sure you're seeing the time and you're like, whoa, dude, like I already know this is going to be long. So just settle in, get yourself a drink, maybe a sandwich, whatever. Let's just relax and talk some video game pickups. Before we go too far though, what you're looking at right now I think is something that's important to discuss. This is a store called Super Potato, which I'm sure every one of you has heard of because it's one of those video game stores that's actually famous for being a video game store. A lot of retro collectors want to go there, and you look at this inventory in this store and you can see why that is. They have multiple locations in Japan, in the Osaka area, the Kansai area, as well as the Tokyo area. What you're seeing here is one of the Tokyo locations. Let me tell you something about this store. There is never really a reason to go here. This is basically like going into a museum that's like for sale because the prices in there are ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous. Like eBay, if not above eBay, maybe sometimes a little under, but it's not a good deal, like pretty much ever. What that place does is it essentially exploits the fact that tourists are coming there. They know what Super Potato is. They know that's where games are. So they just assume that's where they're supposed to go to get them. Terrible, terrible place to actually buy video games. It's possible to occasionally get a deal there, but usually if that happens, it's only because they broke something and they're basically getting rid of it, or if an item has been there so long that it was expensive when they put the price tag on it, and now it's cheap just because the times have changed, yet the price never really changed. I do not recommend ever going to Super Potato, but I had to say this because I knew a ton of you would be like, why didn't you just go to Super Potato and get all your shopping done in one day? LOL. Because it's a bad place to actually go. Go there for the spectacle, look at all the funny, crazy things, and then probably not buy anything. Every single thing in here came from a single store chain in Japan called Hard Off. Now, I've talked about that store chain for years on this channel, and people always laugh at the name for obvious reasons. It's funny because it's actually really benign. It actually just means hardware, but it doesn't matter. It is funny because it's funny. But, you know, that whole thing, the Off thing, is like an entire chain of different types of stores in Japan. There's Garage Off for car parts, Book Off for books and movies and stuff like that. My favorite one, as far as funny goes, is an alcohol chain called Liquor Off. I'm just saying that's funnier. But anyway, so there's a whole bunch of these places, right? And I want to talk a little bit about them and like how they've evolved slightly before we go into this. So Hard Off has been around for a long time. And obviously a bunch of YouTubers have covered it, myself included. There was a time where this chain was completely unknown to tourists. And there were like several YouTubers, not me, that started making videos about it back when they didn't allow you to film stuff. You know, the Japanese are very like that. You know, they don't understand necessarily because they think like that's weird that you would want to walk into a store and just start filming stuff. It seems like you're doing this for incognito, exposition reasons or expository reasons is probably the better way of putting it. Like you're trying to catch them doing something. You know, some drama is going to be caused by this. Therefore, no, none of that. No filming in our store. Like, don't cause problems. We don't want problems. That was kind of the mentality for the longest time. So there were some YouTubers going in and like doing guerrilla style things. And those videos, of course, didn't cause drama, but they did make everybody aware that Hard Off was a thing. So other YouTubers such as myself and other just tourists, etc., started going to these places and realizing like the deals, the deals that could be had were unbelievable. Now, funny thing is, they have since evolved on that. Like, as I've done videos on the place, now they actually encourage filming. They have these big signs inside in English that said, it's okay, go ahead and film, we're totally cool with it, which is somewhat emblematic of what happened to Hard Off. Hard Off is not as great as it used to be. That's just where I'm going with all this. you need to understand a little bit about Japanese culture here. The Japanese are very fiscally conservative, but they're also like preservationists. They really don't like to throw stuff away, even if it has a small amount of value. They would rather get something for that value, even if it means holding on to something for like 20 years. So that's why Japanese stores have so much stuff, because everyone just holds on to it waiting for that 1% payback. I don't know how else to phrase it. But at the same time, Japanese culture doesn't typically encourage going out and buying things like retro games. That's really seen as like a weird foreign tourist thing. Gaijin are the only ones that want to do that, such as myself. So the combination of those two things always meant Hardoff had tons of stuff that no one was buying. And as a result, for them, it was super cheap. It's like, yeah, none of this stuff has value. It has a very small amount of value, and we're willing to sell it at that small amount of value. But the only people who would care about buying old games and things like that were us. So it was kind of a well-kept secret until a whole bunch of us, myself included, kind of ruined it. I'm just going to be honest; it's partially my fault. So Hardoff is not bad. I don't want to get that impression. Hardoff is ultimately like a junk store. So it will have nice areas where they've kind of curated things a bit, but it will also have these what they call junk sections that are just filled with who knows. You know, they're vaguely organized. You can dig through bins and find stuff. But the Japanese definition of junk is very different than ours. Our definition of junk is like truly just toasted. Their definition of junk is like the power cable is missing, so the whole thing doesn't work. Even if the rest of the, like say a video game console, the console can be completely functional, but like a completely like I got some GameCube power supplies here, right? There could be just a GameCube sitting in the junk bin. They're like, well, it doesn't have a power supply, so the GameCube's junk. Even though they also sell GameCube power supplies separately. You understand? Like they sometimes combine them, they sometimes don't. And when I say they sell them, GameCubes were like $3. You know what I mean? Like it was just junk. That's to them, it wasn't worth dealing with. Now, if there was anything special, of course, that prices would reflect that. But it was a great place to find stuff, and still is. It's just that it's changed a bit. So I operated under the assumption that, and like a lot of people, that during the pandemic, because the Japanese don't go in and buy this stuff, that it was just going to be mounting and mounting and mounting for like 2 years, however long Japan remained closed. It was just the only people going in there were like U.S. military or anybody who could get into Japan for special reasons. But like the regular tourists couldn't go. So I just assumed it would be overflowing with inventory. And the Japanese have always had a huge aversion to like selling stuff online in bulk. They usually like to focus on just, no, we're just going to do it this way. We just do it the old school way of like just selling to the local customer and that's it. That has changed. Japanese society rarely changes unless it's forced to. And the closure of Japan for a few years was something that forced them to. What I'm trying to say with this really long story is that they sold a lot of stuff online and they started truncating their spaces. In other words, Hardoff no longer has as great of inventory as it used to. And I went to a bunch of them, man. A lot of them have been like the size of the store was like cut in half. And then the other half is now like a different store entirely. A lot of the junk bins, like the only consoles I was seeing in the junk bins now was Wii's. They had tons of those. PS1s, Super Famicoms, a couple of Famicoms, not as many as I used to see. They used to be just bins and bins. Now there's just a few. As well as, this was the only one that threw me off. I was seeing a lot of Wii U's in junk bins. That one was a little weird. But other than that, it was, even like the occasional junk GameCube was like set aside and put on the counter. And it was not like it was super expensive, but now it's like, oh, instead of $3, it's like $15. Like they figured this out a bit. Which is unfortunate. So while I still found a lot of stuff and got a lot of good stuff, I'm going to be completely brutally honest. If it weren't for the fact that I didn't have to pay sales tax, because that's a tourist perk in a lot of places, Hardoff especially doesn't charge sales tax to tourists, sales tax is 10%. So that's a nice discount right there. But the yen, at the time I went there, and still to some effect at this point in time, completely collapsed. Like the ideal yen to dollar conversion is like 108 or 110 yen to a dollar. Because their sales tax used to be 8%, now it's 10%, so they like parity with the US dollar if they can match it. It fell to like 150 yen to a dollar. So where 1,000 yen used to be around $10, it suddenly was like $6.50. Like, so you see, like, again, if you found a game that was 1,000 yen, it was now essentially like 30% off. Plus you didn't have to pay sales tax on it. So that made up for stuff. So I still did fine. But part of me is almost like this might have been the last great hard off quest in Japan, just due to lack of inventory and increased prices. That said, did fine. So I just wanted that out of the way before a whole bunch of people start booking their flights to Japan thinking they're going to find like all the things they ever wanted at a hard off. It's not as good as it used to be. Sorry to disappoint. But now let's talk about the things we actually got. So, as I mentioned, there's a bunch of junk bins right now. If you want to do the whole tax-free thing, you have to reach a certain financial threshold. Usually it's 5,000 yen. So my goal was to always get over that, provided it made any sense. Like if I only found like one thing and it was like, you know, 10 bucks, I wasn't going to go out of my way to spend an extra whatever just to make that happen. But if it was a small way or easy to do that type of thing, then I would. So the first things the first thing that actually came of that mentality was I actually got a bunch of power supplies here. I got 2 N64 power supplies straight out of the junk bins. They are obviously Japanese, but they completely work on American units. And then I also got 2 GameCube power supplies. Again, same mentality as they're Japanese, but of course they work on the US units. These are the smarter ones, so they actually, I believe these would work on European units as well, from what I recall, because the power supplies were smarter by that point. These were like $1 a piece. Now, did I really need them? Honestly, no. But I have, you know, I get enough consoles, or I've had enough consoles where it's like I have consoles that don't have power supplies, because I usually just, you know, swap them around if I need to. But having a few spares laying around, probably not the worst idea, considering they were basically worthless. But yeah, that was like that mentality. One of the cooler junk bin finds, though, was I found one that actually had some Dreamcast VMUs in it. These were 100 yen each, which is only like 60 cents a piece. Got them back here, tested them all out. Totally fine. Nothing wrong with them. There's just like, they didn't have the lid or whatever. And so, junk, I don't care. You know, you never totally know what goes through the mind of the person who put it in the junk bin, because they'll also have like a curated section where stuff is nicer. And then that stuff is wrapped in plastic and it can be like the exact same item. Hard off's hit or miss, man. This one was not in a junk bin, but it was at a hard off. This was like $5 or something like that. The pink shell VMU. Absolutely nothing special about this other than literally just the pink shell that it is. It's just a limited edition Japanese VMU that we never got. And I think this is technically called watermelon as the color. I just got it because, you know, Dreamcast stuff. Speaking of Dreamcast stuff, I managed to get a couple of discs. And if you guys saw, I did a couple of videos already. I did Playload where I kind of showed some of the pickups. And then I did an entire video on pickups from a place called Mandrake and another one, Surugai Specialty Shop. Like I did all as one video. I got some Dreamcast demo discs of this stupid game called Sentimental Graffiti 2. Fortunately, even though I got some more Dreamcast stuff, none of these are Sentimental Graffiti things. Yay! But as I mentioned in that video, I have a full Dreamcast set. I know, boohoo, first world problems. Which means I very rarely get to pick up Dreamcast stuff because I have it all. I know I sound like a jerk. But like I have the full US set, I have all the European exclusives, all the Japanese exclusives. So the only things that ever surface that are interesting are frankly like promo copies or demo discs or stuff like that. Stuff I don't have just because I didn't bother to get it because it wasn't really attainable. And especially in the case of Japanese ones, like there's no like great lists of what, you know, demo discs surfaced or whatever. So I found a couple and I'm just like, yeah, I don't have that. That's cheap. Let's go for it. This was probably the best one, to be honest. This was, do you remember the game Pen? I think it's Pen Tricillion. It was released here in the US. As far as I can tell, this is a demo disc, but I'm not even 100% sure. It is sealed, which I did not know when I got it because the Japanese like to wrap everything in plastic. So I thought it was just the reseal they put on it, but it's actually like factory sealed still. It says, I tried looking up the information about it and I really couldn't find anything. It's Pen Tricillion, not for sale, 1998, and it just says not for sale all over it. And then on the back, it's, you know, you see the disc itself, which exactly says the same thing. I assume it is a demo disc, but the truth is I don't really know. And I don't really want to break the seal to find out because I've never seen it before or since, and honestly, it's probably nothing interesting beyond like, oh, it's cool, but because I doubt it's like all that rare, but I don't want to break the seal just to find that out. So if anybody actually knows, it would be very interesting to find that out. The other one I got is totally worthless, but I had just never seen it before. Dream Passport 3, which this is not in any way, shape, or form rare. This was in a junk bin at Hard Off. The thing is, there is a bunch... Dream Passport 3 was like broadband software, yes, broadband, like the Ethernet modem, for the Dreamcast that only came out in Japan. So you can browse online with it, whatever you want to do, like in the limited sense of what was available in 2002 or whatever it was. They did 2 different versions of this. The other one is I've got already. I've seen it a million times. It's stupid common. This one I had never seen before. It's CH@BISAO.net. Like, it's just different artwork and everything. I actually ripped the disc just to see if it was in any way different than the other version. The disc is identical. It's just the artwork. But the disc itself has different artwork. Everything about it cosmetically is different. But from a data perspective, 100% the same release. Why? Don't know. Maybe it was bundled in with something. Don't know. But either way, it was like $1. So whatever. Yeah. Moving on. Now we're going to get into like some actual games here. The first one up is for the Virtual Boy. I mentioned this in the Surigaya video. I don't have a Virtual Boy. So I wanted to, but amongst other consoles, if I don't have them and I see games and they're cheap, I just kind of pick them up because I'm assuming I'll get that console at some point. So this one came up. Virtual Fishing. This is not an exclusive title to Japan. This did come out in the US. Virtual Boy did come out in the US. It's just, it never came out in Europe though. It is not a common thing to see Virtual Boy games in the US. Usually when you do, you find them at like conventions or whatever, and it's always some guy who actually is just like selling his collection of Virtual Boy stuff he's already acquired. Just like walking into a store and seeing like a Virtual Boy game. It's happened to me, but it's not a common occurrence. And in Japan, it's not common either. It's just a little bit better. But yeah, that one was like, I want to say like $10 or something like that. I don't really remember, but yeah, so there you go. I have played this. It sucks, but that's not too surprising. Next up, this was cool. I actually skipped over this thinking it was nothing special, and then later on I found out it was. Tetris 2 for the Famicom. The Tetris games that we got on the NES, because the NES is the Famicom, are actually not the same ones they got in Japan. I had bought Tetris 1 at one point on the Famicom because I was told, like, hey, this is a totally different game, whatever, than the American ones. I was like, oh, cool. But Tetris 2, foolishly, I just assumed was the same Tetris 2 we got. No. This is also a completely different game. Super cheap. And I like Tetris, so I was like, okay, you know what? I don't mind picking up something for the Famicom, and that's kind of my Famicom game. So there you go, Tetris 2. This one was neat because of the obscurity of it. This is not something I've ever seen before, maybe never see it again, and it also is just one of those things that's so obscure that it has like no value, and it's not, I'm not really selling it very well, but this is the 8 megabyte memory card for the Satellaview. This requires a little bit of an explanation. In Japan, the Super Famicom, aka Super Nintendo, had an add-on called the Satellaview. It attached to the bottom of the console. I've got one. I think I did a video on it like a number of years ago. And the idea was that you could use it to connect to like servers Nintendo had at the time. It had internet connectivity. And they had this whole like online world they were creating. And you would have these, they were like various, I think it was like 8 Super Famicom games that didn't look like normal Super Famicom or Super Nintendo cartridges. They looked more like the Super Game Boy cartridge almost. They were bigger. And they had this like these slots at the top, and you could put in these like other cartridges with them to do additional things. One of those cartridges was this, the 8 megabyte memory card. This is not a common card, because the function of this was that you would take the Satellaview and you would go online with it, and there would be certain like tournaments and matches and things like that, and you would have to download that content in advance to be able to play it, just because streaming was not really possible at the time, at least that's my understanding. And so you would store it for a while. This cartridge, not this exact one, but this concept, is how we ended up saving the Legend of Zelda BS collection. If nobody's ever heard of that, you guys are familiar with Super Mario, like the Super Mario Brothers games on the NES, I'm sure. Then they did the Super Mario, All-Stars editions for the Super Nintendo, where they took the 8-bit games and completely remade them from the ground up in 16-bit style. I'm sure you're familiar with that. They actually did the exact same thing with the Zelda games. Yeah, the NES Zelda games were brought over to the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom in 16-bit remaster, but exclusively through the Satellaview, and not even in physical form, just through their digital ecosystem, where it had to have been saved onto a card just like this. Now, if you're like, whoa, wait, what? I want to play that. You actually can. Because somebody found one of these cards, accessed it, it hadn't been touched in who knows how long, because these things were supposed to self-delete after a while. Somebody found that it was on there, and then there was like a whole community effort to figure out how to extract that data before it truly did self-delete. They managed to do it. The ROMs are online. There's even repro cards where you can play it where the whole like delete thing is disabled and all that. And I think there was a timer that was also disabled. So you can actually play those. So while I doubt there's anything on this, I don't really want to dive into it unless I have somebody with better archiving cartridge tools, because I doubt there is, but you never know. Just pointing out, this is more interesting and special than it might seem. So I wanted to rescue it, if nothing else. Next up, I got a game for a system I never buy games for, just because the console never came out here, and it's also a horrible console. For the PC-FX, the terrible, terrible, terrible successor to the PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16, I got a game called Farland Story X, or FX, excuse me. This is actually a game, which is the best thing you can say about it for the PC-FX. The PC-FX, I've done an entire video on that thing. It could have been great. It could have been so great, but they had this corporate mandate that like our console's really good at doing FMV, so just make everything FMV. So it was actually really rare to find like a real game on it. This is an RPG, which doesn't help me much because I don't really like RPGs. It's also only in Japanese. So to me, this truly is not playable. But at least it's a game. It's not just an FMV series of cutscenes. So finding that was cool. It apparently supports the PC-FX mouse, which I didn't even know existed. But there you go, an actual PC-FX game, which is nice because almost all the PC-FX games I've got, which I got all in Japan, they're just worthless FMV garbage. I think I had like one real game, and that's about it. This one is kind of funny because in hindsight, I wouldn't have bought this. This was in that same mentality of like, well, I need something to spill over the 5,000 yen mark just so that I can save on the sales tax, where it's one of those stupid things where it's like cheaper to include it because you don't have to pay the sales tax than it is to not include it in the first place. You know what I mean? So anyway, this game is called Hyper Reverthian for the Sega Saturn. It actually looks like a pretty sweet game. I have not played it at all. I'm not saying this is what this game is. I'm just looking at the screenshots. It almost kind of looks like a Panzer Dragoon like type of game, but in reality, it probably is more like a fighting game because it has health bars. As I said, have not played it, solely basing it on screenshots. But yeah, maybe it's decent. I honestly don't know. I know this never came out here. This was exclusive to Japan. It wasn't anything I really wanted. It was just like, that's a Japanese exclusive. It looks like a real game. It's super cheap, and it will put me over the hump. Sole reason I got it. This one was cool, even though the game itself sucks. This is for the N64. The N64, I had one very specific goal when it came to Japan. I want every Japanese exclusive or every Japanese title that did not come out in the US and did not come out in Europe, which was a pretty substantial amount. It was like 80 games. And if you guys watch my older Japanese pickups, you'll like remember like stacks and stacks of N64 games because they're worthless over there. Even now, they're still worthless. It is really funny the difference between what is common and what is rare in Japan. Like let me just explain this to you for 1 second. What is rare over here is usually, not always of course, but usually the really good games everyone wants that had some sort of low print run for one reason or another. So people really want, even if it's not like like your Mario games, even if they're not super rare, they're always consistently expensive because people always want them because they're good games, right? And then your super rare ones usually are something that was, a really, really good game that was, just not enough people bought it or whatever. And then our cheap games are like our sports stuff, super common, whatever. Their mentality is like almost the mirror opposite. Over there, the sports common stuff is like the Mario games. And when you're sitting there looking through these like tubs and tubs and tubs of Super Smash Brothers on N64 for like $1 each. You just kind of go like, why? And it was explained to me very simply. It's like, because everybody bought that one. Of course it has the most copies. The Japanese don't rebuy this stuff. So it's just, there's 1 million copies of Smash Brothers. What else are you going to do with it? Kind of makes sense. So they just sit there. The rare ones end up being the ones that kind of like us, where they had like no print run, or that, you know, really good games that kind of got screwed over for one reason or another like that. Or occasionally it's something that the Japanese actually want, but it didn't have enough copies. And unfortunately, that is what this N64 game is. See, I managed to get, out of like the 80 games or so, I was down to like only 4 that I haven't been able to get. Of all of them, I've seen every single one of them in store at least once, save for one. I've never seen it that I'm aware of. And if I did, I just missed it. But usually they're super expensive, so I couldn't get them. This one is one of those. However, in this case, in Hard Off, it was just sitting amongst all the commons. Not like the bins full of just junk. Like, again, the more curated section where the games are like $10 instead of the junk bin where everything's like $1. But then there's like the behind the glass section where things can be hundreds of dollars. Usually it would be in that hundreds of dollars one. This time it was just sitting on the pegs in like the $10 category. I'm not saying I paid $10. I think I paid more like 40. But that's a pretty good deal for this. But it's an embarrassing game to have picked. Getter Love something or other for the N64. This, I believe, is the only date sim on the N64. This is one of the rare games because this is one of the ones the Japanese actually wanted, and it was a very low print run. Whereas to us, this is essentially what should have been considered worthless, but that's where the cultures clash, man. So I was never willing to put down hundreds of dollars for this. $40 or so for like getting near the end of it. I was never going to be cheaper than that. Okay, fine, we'll get it. We'll be done with it, but wasn't happy about it. For the PlayStation 2, we have the Sega Ages 2500 collection, Dynamite Deca. This requires, I think, a little bit of an explanation. So this was actually really neat. In 2005 or so, Sega just suddenly decided they just loved the PlayStation 2, and they started converting a bunch of their old arcade games and some Dreamcast, a lot of Saturn, and a bunch of just random collections of theirs over to the PlayStation 2. And not only did they do that, they actually did like massive restorations on them and enhancements. They ran them in higher resolutions with better textures. They did a whole bunch of work. We sort of got this in the US. We got something called like the Sega History Collection or something like that for the PS2 that consisted like 10 of these games like all put together. But in Japan, they got tons of these, all individual ones. This one is Dynamite Deca. Now that may not sound like much offhand, but you know what this game actually is? This is Dynamite Cop. Remember Dynamite Cop for the Sega Dreamcast? That was actually Die Hard Arcade 2, or Dynamite Deca 2. Dynamite Deca is Die Hard Arcade. I'm sorry if that was a little confusing. There was a Die Hard Arcade game in the arcade, as well as the Sega Saturn. This is that game remastered for the PlayStation 2. The reason it's not called Die Hard and why that's only like quasi looks like Bruce Willis is because they no longer had the rights and the license to use it, so that's why they came up with Dynamite Deca and Dynamite Cop, because they weren't going to use the official license anymore. These games are awesome. I don't know who out there who has or has not played those. If you have not, you are in for a treat. Play Dynamite Deca 2 on the Dreamcast. You're going to have a blast. But that would be, or Dynamite Cop. This is also a lot of fun. So that was really cool to pick that up. Yeah, happy to have that. For the Wii U, yes! I got something for the Wii U. The Wii U is one of the few consoles where I actually have a complete set. I have every American title, much like the Dreamcast. I have all the European exclusives, and I have all the Japanese exclusives. I finished that a while ago. And so I was not expecting there to be anything else, because the Wii U didn't really have demo discs. You know, there might be some like occasional like promo copy or something, but nothing that would really count. But there was one thing I didn't know existed until I was sitting there in a hard off, and there it was. The official cleaning kit. Yeah, you can laugh, it's fine. This is a thing, though. This was sold at retail barely. Like, I looked into this. This only came out in Japan in a comically low run. It's cool though. When you open it up, it has like a manual and like the instructions on how to use it. It has a couple of like felt cloth type of things. It even has this little like liquid pen full of cleaning solution that you're supposed to put on the disc. So the disc is actually, it has a little bit of a data ring. You know, if you put this in the Wii U will detect what this is. At least, all right, so I'm going to be full disclosure. I have a hacked Wii U that is region free. I don't know if this would do anything on a standard American unit, but when you pop it into the Wii U, it knows what this is. And so if you tell it to run, it just goes ahead and it's like, oh, okay, and it just runs it for a few minutes. On the bottom, there's actually a couple like little textured pads. And I guess those textured pads meet up with certain points in the laser assembly so that it can clean them the best. It actually makes a big deal about this on the back. It says like, use this on the Wii U. Never use this on the Wii, because I guess the laser is placed in different locations and it could cause significant damage. Like I actually looked into that and it's like, yeah, that's a thing. Only ever use this on the Wii U and never use the Wii version on this. Even though they would technically be compatible with each other, at least the Wii version would. This apparently must tell you to warn you about the Wii, because even if you put it in a standard Wii, it might detect what that is and try to run it. I don't really know. I'm certainly not going to try, but I found that kind of fascinating. So yeah, this was a really cool pickup to get, because realistically, man, this is like the last Wii U like release I'm ever gonna have, aside from maybe some random promo copy I'm not even aware of the existence of currently. But yeah, cool. Moving on, we got some games for the Xbox 360. Now, I've told this story 2 times in a row in the last couple of pickups videos, so I'm not going to do all the details again, but the TLDR, Xbox 360 was much more popular in Japan than people think it was. It actually had a lot of great releases on it until Microsoft of the US completely screwed it up. I'm not going to elaborate again. But I've managed to pick up a few games now that I have a hacked up region-free console. It was finally worth checking out. So the first one that I got is not exclusive to Japan, in the sense that this game did come out here, but we only got it digitally. They got it physically, which is interesting. No More Heroes for the Xbox 360 had a physical edition in Japan. This was cheap, man. This was like 200 yen. That's like $1.10, $1.20, something like that. It's not expensive at all. So that was really cool. I was like, oh, dude, I tried playing this for a while. It actually is completely in English, which is even better. So, like, yeah, this is great. There was a bunch of Japanese text around, but the game's audio is entirely in English. I think the menu was in Japanese and a mixture of Japanese and English, but this is definitely playable in English. Next one up I thought this might have come out here, but I couldn't find any record of it. Funny enough, so, all right, I admit it. I've got a hacked 360, as I said before, and when you have one of those, and I would archive these games to the console, because then it will download from a digital database to tell you like everything else metadata-wise about the game you put in. This was the only game I put into it where it had no idea what this was. It's like, it is a 360 disc. I can run it. I cannot tell in the metadata what this game is. It is Mobile Suit Gundam Operation Troy. Now, there was a bunch of Gundam stuff here. There was even more over there. This one, I couldn't find any record of it having come out here. And if it did, it must have come out in a completely different name. But the system, usually when that's the case, the system will give it the American name or the European name, or we'll figure it out. In this case, it was like unknown Xbox 360 title. Like, it didn't have any information on it. It wasn't rare. It wasn't valuable. Again, it was like 200 yen. It was nothing. But I just found it fascinating. So, yeah, got that. It's, a mech game, right? I don't know if this is like some sort of supplemental material that was supposed to be some sort of additional thing. It does make mention of Xbox Live. It also makes mention of the fact that it was only on the 360. Yeah, it's a thing. And the last one up is called Strike Witches. This is a shoot 'em up by a company called Cyberfront. Some anime shoot 'em up type of game. I don't really care about all the anime stuff, but like you play as these little girls, like little witches, it looks like, with giant machine guns flying along and doing shoot 'em up stuff. Probably fairly decent. I played it for like a minute. I was just testing everything. It seemed fine compared to some of the others, but yeah, there you go. Next up, check this out. I got a really sweet looking GameCube controller. I believe officially this is referred to as the Emerald controller. It's blue, turquoise-ish, more of a blue. But I've seen this in Japan a few times. Always behind glass, always super expensive. In this case, it was in Hardoff's curated section, so don't get the wrong idea. This didn't come out of a junk bin, but it was only like $10. I think it was just like some guy was like, oh, GameCube controller, $10. Like, not thinking about that. That actually is an interesting difference. You know, we were talking about like how Hardoff used to be versus how it is now. This would be an example of them slipping because they just called it a generic controller. But back in the day, you would go into the Hardoff junk bins and there would just be a sea of GameCube controllers. It's just that it was always the same ones. So now it's like all the GameCube controllers, we know that the Gaijin come over here, they like their Smash Brothers, they're going to buy these controllers and whatever. So put them all in the $10 rack. But in this case, the guy screwed up because he made the special controller only $10. So that was, I didn't really need this or anything, but I was like, yeah, no, that's happening. That's a very rare edition of the controller. There are rarer ones, of course, but that's a special one. So that was cool we got. Now, an old throwback though. I also got another controller, and this one did come out of the junk bin. This one cost 100 yen, which is like 60 cents. They had some Dreamcast controllers in there. Now, they had some white ones, which I didn't need, so I just left them there. But this one's special. Check this out. This is the transparent, like, clear one. So, I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about this, which is a little embarrassing, because Dreamcast is kind of my wheelhouse. But I had no idea what the story was with this. Now, to be fair, Japan got a lot of limited edition and random edition Dreamcast controller colors that we never got. We only got, like... We got the standard one, the black one, like the Sega Sports version, and then like 4 colors. And that was it. Japan got tons of them. Tons that I've shown over the years. This one, it's funny, because if you guys saw the Suragaya video, you know at the end of that video, I'm showing this like Dreamcast like Ultimate Collector's Guidebook I found, right? That thing actually told me what this was. This was the pack-in for the Seaman Edition console. Now, to be fair, it looks like after finding that out, I looked at it a little more online, there was a limited edition of this being sold by itself. So it either came from its own separate edition or someone disconnected it from a bundle for whatever reason and it ended up in a junk bin for whatever reason. This was a score, man. Like, finding that was awesome. So, very happy about that. But, yeah, especially for me, man, like, you know, if anybody saw one of those, very old video now, but like 3 or 4 years ago, I went to Japan and I got the Claire Red Dreamcast, and it was complete. I've got the box, it's amazing, right? And open it, unbelievable. And I take it out of Japan, everything's good to go. Now, I had this weird flight route because I was basically leaving the U.S. by I stopped in Guam first, which is also part of the U.S., and then I eventually made it over to Hawaii, which is, of course, part of the U.S., and then up back to Chicago. And so there were multiple stop points. I think actually it was Hawaii to Houston, Houston to Chicago. So point is, my luggage, everything that had been checked, had gone through like multiple points. And somewhere in there, TSA opened the bag, like undid everything and then redid everything. And in that process, the red GameCube or red Dreamcast Claire controller went missing. I don't think they ever stole it. People have like, oh, you should file a report. It's like, what am I going to say? Like, first of all, I have no idea where it could have occurred. Second of all, I'm sure they didn't steal it. I'm sure it was just negligence. So it's not impossible that these random controllers get decoupled from the bundle consoles. If that happened, though, if I ever find these, you know, the Seaman Edition Dreamcast, I'm good to go. So that's awesome. Now, we've got one last thing on this table before we reset here. This requires a huge asterisk and a huge understanding. The following item is a special level of rare. It is also not mine. I want that to be very clear. It is in my temporary custody, and I'm only showing it to you because of how uniquely rare it is. The story here was I was in a Hardoff, obviously, and I saw this thing behind glass, and it was stupid expensive for the Sega Saturn. Like, I did the math on it. It was over $1,000. And I was like, what on the Saturn that isn't the American copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga could possibly be worth $1,000? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. So I took photos of it, and I sent it to, like, various Sega Saturn groups. And they got on that in a second. Apparently, this thing that I'm about to show you, only like 20 copies of this were ever made because it's not really a game. It was like some sort of like promo item for like selling houses or something, like virtual tours of houses. Saturn was popular in Japan, so it meant they did weird things with it from time to time. This is that. So I asked the guys, like, do you want this? You know, like, is anybody willing to put down $1,000 to save this? Because my expectation is, I will buy this for you now. You will pay me for it. We'll just break even. That's fine. It's a small little thing. I'm happy to play my role in saving the Saturn history, but I'm not willing to spend $1,000 for this thing. I'm just not. And so there was a very nice man. His name is Kei Kona. He is to the Sega Saturn what I am to the Dreamcast. Just loves it, has to have everything for it, except he's on a different level. Like these demo discs I found, he would have been laughing like, of course I've got like 10 copies if it was the Saturn. This was one of the few things he didn't have. So he's like, yeah, I need that in my life. And so, yeah, I went ahead and I got it for him. It is a thing called iFull Home. This thing is an expensive little thing. And so it's cool to have temporary custody of it, but that's really all it is. Yeah, I figured you guys would appreciate seeing it. But there it is, iFull Home. Welcome to Oregon and Basic. Free walk, plans, CM Theater. Again, this is like not a game. I can't stress that enough, but I figured people would like to see it. Actually, let's top that. We're going to make before we transition to the next sequence, let me show you the rarest thing you will have seen all day. The iFull Home on the Sega Pluto. Why not? There's only 2 of these consoles on the planet. There's only like 20 of those ever made. Who knows how many actually still exist? That's another thing we got to keep in mind. There might only be 2 copies of this in the world for all we know. This might be the only copy in the world. Who knows? Yeah, I did a thing. I got a Virtual Boy. Sorry. No, all right, so this was kind of interesting. I've never had a Virtual Boy. Well, okay, I sort of did once. If there's an old video on this channel where I had like just the unit and it didn't work, and I brought it to the UK to a shout out to my buddy Ben Shenmuso. We tried to get it to work, and it, whatever, just watch the video. So that was the only time I ever technically had a Virtual Boy. I remember playing it a few times, and it's like, oh, good, laser pointers in my eyes. It really hurts. This is a great time. But to be fair, I've been playing it more now after my buddy Candace, she made the Virtual Girl. She's like to the Virtual Boy what I am to the Dreamcast. So she gave me a whole bunch of tips on like how you play it. And once you kind of know that, you're like, oh, this isn't a completely awful experience. So I apologize for kind of misleading you guys in this video and in the previous one, because I obviously did have a Virtual Boy. I just didn't want to bury the lead, as it were. But yeah, so yes, I've got a Virtual Boy now. This one was in great shape. Came with the box. I really like the Japanese box art. It looks like, hey, we're trying to sell you an interesting, mature adult product. And I mean that in a very benign way. It just looks like something I would want to own. Whereas the American box art kind of looks like the 90s threw up on it. I don't know how else to explain it. And of course, Europe never got the console or the platform, whatever. But yeah, history's like Nintendo, like history remembers this as Nintendo's like abandoned child that they never speak of. I mean, you think they dislike how the Wii U turned out? Like, no. Virtual Boy gets like almost no acknowledgement from them. It's very short-lived platform. We can now do a video on it at some point. We'll get around to it. But yeah, great shape. The console works perfectly. It doesn't have that like little glitch issue that can happen, particularly on the left side. The box is in good shape. It came with various things. It came with the controller and the battery pack. It came with, I left it in there, but it came with like the power supply cable, which is like that Super Nintendo power supply. It came with various manuals and stuff and pamphlets, and just here's like an explanation of how the Virtual Boy works, and yeah, just all sorts of stuff. It even came with a bonus copy of Mario Tennis, which is now like my 3rd copy of Mario Tennis, which says something about how common this game actually is, but still cool nonetheless. But yeah, that was like one of my big pickups. If you're curious, it was about $200, which is not a terrible price for a Virtual Boy. With the box, that's a really good deal, and you know, the fact that it's in great condition. So I kind of, you know, of course, like anybody, I wish I had bought it, you know, years ago. Because I was pretty good at that, as you probably noticed over the years on my channel. I've managed to get things that I was like, I care when no one else does. But the Virtual Boy was just the wrong time in my life, the wrong age range. Like that was, hey, if I was going to commit to a game console or a platform, like it was going to be mine, you know, just because of how old I was. And when they were on like clearance for like $40 and nobody could get rid of them, It wasn't in my wheelhouse. Like I said, that box just threw me off entirely. So yeah, it's really cool to actually have this now finally, because I've never, like, except for that brief one, I never really had access to one. And, I spent a lot of time actually playing all the games I was talking about earlier. I'm not kidding. Jack Bros is an awesome game. Like, I get it now. Like, I get why that game is rare and valuable, because it's really good and completely lives or dies on this system. And a lot of the other games are not that good, but some of them are. Like, Mario Tennis is actually a pretty good game. It's not bad. So, Virtual Boy, very misunderstood console platform. Like, you gotta stop calling it a console, because it isn't technically one. But it is a very hard thing to make anybody understand it unless they actually try it. And even then, unfortunately, the library is very limited. But now I've got like a decent little Virtual Boy collection. Maybe we'll do some videos on it. I don't know exactly what, but who knows? We'll get around to it. But very cool. And yeah, it's got this weird, almost like prototypey GameCube controller. It's like the GameCube controller and the Super Nintendo controller hooked up. I don't know how else to phrase it. This is a weirdo controller, but I like it. It takes a little getting used to, though, because like the whole point is to immerse your senses in this thing. So like you kind of forget what button is what, and you can't see anything. I don't know. It takes some getting used to. I can see why it flopped. I can see why they thought it would work. I also, if you know the history of it, it's insane that they chose to release it as quickly as they did. But one day we can talk about that. It was a prototype. It wasn't meant for release. Anyway, yeah. So the other things, we did one of Nintendo's biggest, most obscure platform of all time. We're going to talk about another one real quick here. You know what this is? I haven't even taken this out of the wrapping because I kind of wanted to show you like proof that I actually just bought this. This is the Sega Bina. Anybody? Does anybody know what this is? The Sega Bina, in short, is actually Sega's last console, not the Dreamcast. This thing is so obscure that, like, I didn't even know that until a couple of years ago. Like, you know how I found this out? Sega had me do, like, they were doing this thing for their 60th anniversary. I think it was called this Go Sega campaign. And so they actually reached out to me because they were like, you have all our consoles. Can you do like a video kind of showing all of them? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I was getting it all set up. And then at one point they were like, you don't have the Bina in there. And I was like, what? I had to look it up. And I knew of the existence of the Bina, but I just assumed it was like an upgraded version of the Sega Pico, which is technically what it is. But even Sega themselves considers it, technically speaking, their last console. It came out, if I remember correctly, it came out in like 2007, like after the Dreamcast was done. I don't remember offhand, maybe it was 2005. But technically it's their last piece of hardware. And it's one that they do not mention. Not for shame reasons, but just because nobody cares. Like, nobody knows about it, nobody cares about it. And these things are worthless. If you're ever like, oh man, I want to have that just for the Sega history, like, how am I going to find one? Go to any hard off. They're always in there. They're always worthless. They're junk. They're just sitting there all the time. This one was like $10. This one came with the power supply, the composite cables. This one even came with the random SD card adapter. Yeah, this thing is recent enough that it has its own official SD card adapter. Yep, and I bought it. If you're like, wait, hold up. Sega's got a whole console after the Dreamcast that was never released here, and nobody talks about. Why? What possible reason do they not talk about it? Why have I never heard of this thing? Because it sucks. It is designed for little kids. I mean, we're like maximum age like 4. This is like early development type of thing. Like it opens up kind of like a laptop, and then it has like an interactive touchscreen. It does connect to a television, of course, and there's games specifically for it. But that's it. Its only real claim to fame, along with the Sega Pico, which was the one we actually got years earlier in the 90s, is that this and the Sega Pico were the only times Nintendo made games for Sega hardware. There are Pokemon games on this thing. And before you get all excited out there, they are not good. They are purely like for your shelf. If you're a Pokemon fan, be like, yes, of course I have all the Pokemon games. And when I say all, I mean all. That's really the only reason I got it. Like, just to be able to say, oh yeah, I have all the Sega consoles, because this was like a weird omission. Because if you go back and watch that Go Sega video I was talking about, I do mention it, but it's like I get to it and I can only show photos of it because I'm like, yeah, I didn't know. I didn't have access to it, which was a little surprising. It's like, dude, I own a Sega Wonder Mega, and I didn't own a Sega Beat-Up. You thought we were done, didn't you? Oh. Actually, no, you're smart. You could see the time code, so you knew that wasn't true. Yet you put me out here, make me feel like a liar, which I guess I sort of did because of the Virtual Boy thing. So I guess we're even. Anyway, yes, we're not quite done. Isn't this insane? I told you we were going out with a bang, man. If this is truly the last hard off video, which hopefully it's not, but if it is, if it's the last, like, oh man, everything we amassed from hard off, what a way to go. All the stuff you've seen so far, plus this stuff, and then there might be another thing. It's possible. I'm not saying there is. It's possible. This is insane. So what we have here is two obscure consoles that we're going to talk about briefly. I think each one of them deserves their own dedicated video at some point, particularly in the Rare Variants series, but let me give you a little truncated explanation of each one, as well as the circumstances in which I got them. Now first, over here we have, to your left, my right, the SNK Neo Geo CD-Z. This was an upgraded version of the Neo Geo CD released at the very end of 1995, only in Japan. And other than the cosmetics of it, the performance difference in it is that it had like a 2x read speed drive, so it read games a lot faster. That's about it. It is not a common version of the console. It's also by far the most sought after one because the load times on it are so much better than on the other units. I've known people to have them. I've seen them before. But usually when I saw them, they were, of course, behind glass. They were super expensive, you know, whatever. This was interesting because I was at a hard off, of course, and I found something I wanted. Something I haven't necessarily shown you guys yet. And I was like, well, man, I want this too, but that's a lot of money, man. And I'll just put it out there. I was hanging out with this guy named Joseph, who I talked about in the previous pickups video. He's a dude who actually lives out there. He's an American, but he lives in Japan as U.S. military. And he was like, I got this. And I will never forget this because I had no idea you could do this. He started asking the guy for a discount, and he would just say, "Oh, discount." Like this, Joseph was saying it that way. He was like, "Oh, discount," and the guy was like, "Oh no," you know, like that means like no, he can't do that. And then Joseph just kept pushing, "No, discount, discount." He just kept saying it, and it's like what they have to understand about the Japanese is they want to be polite to you, but they also know they lack the language skills to interact with you, and they know you lack the language skills to interact with them. So in an effort to not really disappoint you, sometimes they'll just do what you ask so that you go away. And so the dude goes off for like a couple minutes and comes back. And then he offers us a discount, which I thought would be like $5, $10. I did not think we were going to get anything significant. When you crunch all the numbers, he basically just gave this to me for free. I want you to wrap your mind around that for a second. He knocked off such a substantial discount from the items. He was basically like, you just have that. Which also should tell you the caliber of the other thing I got, which may or may not have, you haven't seen it yet. But yeah, really cool. I'm looking forward to doing a video on this thing because I just think it's neat. But yeah, to have that finally is cool because that means I now have every iteration of the Neo Geo CD. What up? Veterans of this channel remember an era in which I was like, oh, I want a Neo Geo CD. I've never had one. Now it's like I've got all three versions of the console, and I'm like, I'm not going for a full disc set or anything, but like, I've got the majority of them now, which is like, woo, times have changed. But anyway, yeah, very cool to have that. And this one, the far more rare machine, I had only ever seen one of these once ever, and it was in the hands of a private collector I saw in California. He was just like, oh, you want to see one? I've got one. And it was like, wow, this console is very obscure. This is the Super Graphics, the PC Engine Super Graphics. Now, I've messed up in the past because I think I referred to the Game Boy original going to the Game Boy Color as like the first pro edition of a console, like where they kind of took something and then upgraded it slightly without calling it something new. Then Nintendo revised it and said, oh no, it is its own thing. So there were some, before we got to like PS4 and PS4 Pro or Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Xbox One X, before that became more of a standard, nobody was really doing that. I made the mistake of saying, oh yeah, nobody ever did that before, like the new 3DS or the Game Boy Color or whatever. Nope. NEC actually did this way back in the 90s, the early 90s. They made this thing, these super graphics. This is essentially the PC Engine Pro. And the way they did that is, of course, it could play all the PC Engine stuff, but it also had additional hardware under the hood. Now, the way that worked was a little different than the way the Pro consoles do now. The Pro consoles now are basically like, hey, if you have our version, if you have an Xbox One game or whatever, or a PS4 game, and it can be enhanced on the enhanced version, then it will be enhanced. It will have the better frame rate or the higher resolution or whatever the difference is. But that doesn't preclude that version of the game from actually running on the base model. So if you bought an Xbox One X enhanced game and then ran it on the old VCR model, the game would still work, it just wouldn't have the enhanced benefits. This was not the same. They released games for this thing, for the super graphics, that could only run on the super graphics. Only 5 of them. This one came with 4 of them. We've got... honestly, I don't remember the name of this game. I'll put it up on the screen. It's some sort of like anime, like robot game or whatever. Then we have a game called Battle Ace. I actually played a bunch of these. These are surprisingly fun. This is Ghouls and Ghosts. This is like the superior version of Ghouls and Ghosts. How cool is that? And then one called Aldine's The Mission Code for Rage Crisis, which is a strange sentence. But it came with all 4 of those. There's one other game, I think it's 1941, like the shoot 'em up game. Was the only one that exists that I don't have now, I guess. I guess accidentally got a small subset here. When I got this, I again found it at a hard off. They knew what it was. It was behind glass. But it was clearly sitting there for a while because the prices reflected like pre-pandemic, like it was still like that. But now, with the crash of the yen, and of course I didn't have to pay sales tax on it, I was like, it will never be cheaper. It was like essentially like I bought the console kind of at its normal rate, and then all the games were just free. I put money on this. Okay, I want you to understand that I put money down on this, and I'll do a video on it at some point, I think, because why not? A rare variants video, something like that. But yeah, that was that one hurt. I'm not gonna lie, that one hurt. But it's here now. It is. I gotta be honest. It is really funny because I have a whole bunch of different versions of the PC Engine. I have more versions of the console than I do games for it. Still, very cool to actually have it. But yeah, it'll get its own video someday, sometime. But there was one other thing. One other thing that I don't even... Here we go. Here it is. The stupidest thing I ever bought. There's a few of you out there looking at this like, bruh. And there's a few of you being like, bruh. Okay. Here's what happened. Obviously, I'm at the hard off. And this was the one where the Neo Geo CDZ came from. So this was the first thing that got my attention. And this was technically in the junk bin. And when I say technically, you have to understand that even as a junked item, this thing has ridiculous value. And they knew that. So they kept it behind glass, yet in the junk bin. I don't know how else to phrase it. It's like it had its own glass case amongst the junk section, and it was in there. And so I was like, I cannot believe what I'm seeing right now. And sat there thinking about it. Could I afford to do this? How bad would this hurt? How many meals would I have to skip, or like whatever, which I could probably use to do anyway. Like how impossible is it for me to actually own this? You know, is this the most insane thing I've ever thought to do? And then I decided to pick the brains of a few people in the Saturn community. And if I obviously haven't said it yet, this is a version of the Sega Saturn. And one day this will 100% get its own video. This, I was asking people, because I know a couple people that actually have these. Only 2 people, because it's a very rare machine. I'm like, what do these things go for? And they were telling me numbers that were astronomical, like way beyond what Hardoff was asking. So it was expensive, but much cheaper than it should have been. So that's when we were looking at, like, because they had a little card in Japanese. Neither of us spoke Japanese, so we're trying to get it translated and all that. And basically, there was a little card explaining that there were some problems with it. That so it has this little screen, which we'll talk about in a second. They were saying the screen doesn't work and the video output doesn't work, so they don't really know if it functions or not. Hence, junk bin. It also didn't have they said the controller port was broken. And that the power supply didn't function properly or something. It was, it's Google Translate and also like not very well written. So I was like, okay. Okay. So I'm feeling people out about this, seeing if they think it makes any sense for me to do this. And everybody I talked to, who like my repair guys per se, were all like, I'll take a stab at it. I think we can handle it. I think we can do it. I was like, okay, all right, let's pull the trigger. Let's make this work. So let me break this down a little bit. What is this thing? This is the Hitachi High Saturn GPS model. Yes, you heard that right. GPS, that's not a random series of letters. It means Global Positioning System. This thing was developed by Hitachi for the use in Japanese cars. Like, the idea was you would get it, kids could play games on the portable screen, but it also had a fully operational GPS system back in like the mid 90s, like 96, had special software for that purpose, and it had its own screen on there so that you weren't necessarily dependent upon a television, but of course it had video out in case you wanted it. So I ultimately got it, and once I got it back here, I started trying to assess the problems they described. The first was the controller port issue. Controller port is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I figured out what they meant, though. It came with the controller, the Hitachi one. However, the actual controller, like at the edge here, is like damaged. So if I were to replace the guts of this with like some other Saturn controller, boom, then I have a fully operational. I just have to replace the cable essentially, and you have a controller again. Not a big deal. Second one, regards to the power supply issue. What they meant was it didn't have the original power supply. Instead, it had only the car power supply, aka this brick. So this is what you would plug into the car. It didn't have like the wall outlet power supply. So I thought, okay, there's a workaround. So I went to Amazon and I got this thing. This is literally just like a converter for that exact purpose. So yeah, that all works fine. So what about the console itself? Well, they said the screen didn't work. It does. Just not perfectly. And to be fair, it's really bad. It looks like somebody punched the screen as hard as they possibly could. But sound worked, video worked, you could see it, and it verified that the discs worked. It could play games. So I was like, okay, so everything under the hood is kind of all right. Then I went to connect it to a TV, and that's where I ran into problems. I could hear it, and I could never see it. And I was like, man, that sounds like a bad issue. Like, why does it work on the screen, this screen, but it doesn't work on the TV? And I just couldn't figure that out. I was trying a bunch of stuff, and nothing would work. And I started talking to one of the guys, Kei Kono, who I mentioned before, the guy who bought that super rare game from the first part of the video. I started talking to him about this. I'm like, why would it not give a video signal? He's like, how are you connecting it? And I was like, well, I just, I have, at the moment, just for testing purposes, I just have, one of those cheapo pound cables connected to it just to plug and play and see if it does anything. And he's like, that's why. He's like, those require the RGB signal. This unit, for whatever reason, does not support the RGB signal. What? So then I went ahead and I just grabbed a set of composite cables and it totally worked. Meaning it's completely functional. That's where I'm going with all this. So it turns out you can even RGB mod these things. So maybe one day that'll happen. I don't really know. But yeah, this is one of the coolest, rarest, if not the rarest edition of the Sega Saturn that isn't literally the Sega Pluto, which is insane. Now, what's truly special about it, now, I don't know the exact numbers. I'm just kind of recalling off of memory what Kay said. But I think he told me they only made like 1,000 of the actual console. But the monitor was not actually sold with it. It was like a separate thing. And maybe a couple hundred of those were ever made. It's completely unknown. He said this monitor is like his white whale. He's like been looking for it, he said, for 15 years. And there it was, right there. And it just came with it with no additional expense. Sorry, Kay. So that was the big, like, okay, now I have to get it. Because the monitor itself is worth more than the system. And at the price they were charging, it's just, like, it's going to need a little maintenance. You know, I've already talked to a guy, my buddy Chris. He's going to do some work on it. We're going to maybe replace the screen itself with, like, better operational one, do the RGB mod, etc. But aside from that, it doesn't need anything, which is insane. So, far and away, financially speaking, the stupidest pickup I have done in a long time, if not debatably ever, which is kind of a bold statement. But man, I don't regret it at all. I think I would have regretted it if it like truly was just junked underneath, but the fact that it essentially completely works is kind of hard to... It's like, dude, how could this be better? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the only way it could have been better is if they thought the screen didn't work and I just turned on the contrast and that was all the problem was. They just didn't know there was a dial or something. That's the only way it would have been better, you know? So, yeah, very cool. The cartridge slot and everything for, like, the action replay, that totally works. I put, like, a pseudo Saturn in there to see if it could play if that thing worked and I could play the imports. Yep, 100%. Everything's fine. It's just, boom, just awesome pickup. And, I mean, like I said before, man, if this is the end of hard-off pickups, like big ones, then what a way to go. You know, I didn't find that FM Towns Marty Ghost I've been chasing forever, but I'm pretty happy with what I got. So I hope you guys enjoyed this really long video with all these pickups. I hope you got something out of it. And keep in mind, if you go to Japan, you can still get good stuff, but it's getting harder than it used to be. And I need to stress this. The only reason that this was worth it and didn't turn out to be a dud was just because of the collapse of the yen and the no sales tax thing. Otherwise, I would have been like, I'm barely saving any money here. It wasn't worth coming here. And to be fair, I used miles to go there. It's not like I bought a flight. But you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're like, I'm the guy who's out there, like, I'm making this my Japan passion project trip. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go to all these stores. I'm going to buy all this stuff. Not as good as it used to be. But that also depends on what you're looking for. You know, at the same time, diminishing returns. I've bought a lot of things that I wanted over the years, and there's less and less things that even exist that I would want, because I don't buy duplicates. Like, if I found this again, I probably wouldn't get it unless it was like stupid cheap. Like, oh, mislabeled as a generic Saturn for $5 or something. Like, that's really the only context in which I would pick up another one. But you know what I'm saying? So, yeah. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. I hope you guys, if anybody out there wants to go to Japan, they get to go enjoy that trip. Thank you guys as always for watching. If you can't go to Japan or you are curious about it, you want more information, please check out my travel channel with a whole bunch of videos on Japan. There's literally 10 videos on 2 weeks in Japan. Check it out. Also, please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon. All that sort of stuff is in the description. As well as, please do me a favor, just like this video. Comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't done that already. That's it. Thank you very much for the support, and I'll see you all later.